Welcome, I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are coming to you from Washington, D.C. We are joined by McClintock. He is a member of the United States Congress representing portions of Northern California, including significant parts of the Sierra Nevadas, such beautiful mountains that are just are not white right now.
We've got Lake Tahoe, we've got Yosemite Valley, Kings Canyon. It's the most beautiful part of the country.
So talk to us about what we're seeing in the Sierra Nevadas. I know the snowpack has gone up a bit. Maybe we're at about 30% of where we should be, better than 12 from back in January, but how is it for you and your constituents?
I mean, obviously we're in a very serious drought. Droughts are inevitable. Droughts are Mother Nature's fault. Water shortages, on the other hand, are our fault. We've not built a major storage facility for the past 35 years.
And let's, if we can, really talk about storage. What exactly is storage?
It means building dams to retain water in wet years so that we have it in dry years. You know, the travesty is Northern California is one of the most water-rich areas of the continent, and yet we're looking at our reservoirs drained almost dry. A lot of it because of unnecessary releases due to environmental regulations. This past fall, for example, 800,000 acre-feet of water was deliberately drained out of our Northern California dams to meet all these various environmental requirements. By the way, ended up in being sent to Southern California after it was released. Which adds insult to injury. But the bottom line is, you know, the 800,000 acre-feet of water, that's a 1 acre column of water 150 miles deep. It's a tremendous amount of water. And it was needlessly released, even knowing that we were approaching a catastrophic drought year.
What's challenging, though, and you know this as well as anyone, is the courts are the courts. And if the courts order something, it's hard to go against what they say. But simultaneously, though, we do even have the governor of California, a Democrat, Governor Jerry Brown, looking to see some environmental regulations or some water regulations relaxed.
Well, on the contrary, we've seen nothing but rhetoric out of him. He's proposed $14 billion for these cross-delta tunnels that add absolutely zero additional water storage, zero additional hydroelectricity, $14 billion. For $6 billion, we could bring the Shasta Dam up to its design elevation of 800 feet. That would produce 9 million acre-feet of additional storage. That nearly doubles the water storage on the entire Sacramento River system.
Interestingly, some Democrats and Republicans agree with you, specifically on the Shasta. I mean, that's a very specific issue. But when we look at what's happening in California, I know you're a federal congressman, of course, but there is a bond that is being considered. And in that bond, there is money for storage, whether the Democratic proposal or the Republican proposal, but there's no doubt that on the Republican side, there is more money set aside for storage. Where do we go with that debate on the question of storage?
First of all, storage should not be paid for by general taxpayers. It ought to be paid for by revenue bonds redeemed by the users of the water and power that these dams generate. That's how we financed the entire state water project a generation ago. That's how we financed the Hoover Dam. That's the proper way of doing it. Furthermore, we put the cart before the horse these days. We go out and we authorize money without any idea of what it's going to be used for. Oh, well, storage. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, nobody knows because they've never defined it. The result is it becomes a grab bag for all of these local water districts, and we end up with no real effect. I mean, if you look at the amount that was spent on the state water project a generation ago, the Burns-Porter Act, that comes to about $17 billion in today's inflation-adjusted measure. For $17 billion, we got 7 million acre-feet of water storage, 21 dams, 3,000 megawatts of hydroelectricity generation.
When we come back, let's continue this conversation. For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, sir, there is no question, I think both sides would agree, that storage is a very important issue.
No, both sides don't agree on that. This is what's so frustrating. I mean, we've been fighting. Not only have we seen resistance for building any new dams in the last generation, the environmental left is actually actively agitated to tear down existing dams. You just mentioned that water bond.
Right.
That water bond includes $500 million to tear down 4 perfectly good hydroelectric dams on the Klamath River. The same people that are now backtracking and saying, oh, well, we need to do something about storage. We're not quite sure what. Just a few years ago, we're agitating to tear down the Hetch Hetchy Dam. The Hetch Hetchy is what provides water for San Francisco.
But if you look at the bond proposals, again, I know you're in the federal Congress, there is money set aside.
But the projects are not even identified, and that's what happens. We've done this before. We've had a number of water bonds like this. They set aside money, they say, for storage. They never designate what that storage is, and so the bond becomes a grab bag for local water projects that don't add up to a hill of beans. I mean, again, we have spent far more over the past 10 years or so on water bonds than we spent to build the entire state water project a generation ago, which raises the question, where is our generation's state water project? As I said, we haven't built a major dam since 1979.
So here's the question, though. There's no question, as you say, that we need storage. Will it happen? Who knows? But storage takes time to build. And so what do we do today?
We start building now. You know, the old story of Charles de Gaulle wanted some oak trees planted in front of his provisional headquarters, and one of his adjutants said, well, General de Gaulle, it takes decades for these oak trees to grow to maturity. And he said, well, then you better not waste any more time. Here's the bottom line. Everybody thinks that Colorado is the mother lode of all water in the western United States. Colorado is a junior sister to the mighty Sacramento. There's actually more water on the Sacramento. The difference is we store 70 million acre-feet on the Colorado. We store just 10 million acre-feet on the Sacramento. Most of the rest of that gets lost to the Pacific Ocean. We are not going to be clear of our water shortage problems until we take the steps in this generation that the last generation took to assure that we are storing that water in wet years so that it's available in dry years.
But I still want to push you, if I may, because there's no question that today we have a problem.
Yeah.
And storage can't be built quick enough to help us today.
Yeah.
So what do we do today?
We learn from our mistakes of the past generation, and we start building now to assure that this never happens again.
But still, do we look to conserve today? Do we look to recycle today? Do we look to
conservation is what we've been doing for the past generation. Instead of building new storage facilities, which increases the supply of water available, we've said, oh no, we don't need to do any of that. We'll simply conserve water. Well, conservation is a very important management tool when you have a shortage, but it is not a substitute for additional supply. So what we're now finding is, by making that mistake, we've already conserved an enormous amount of water, and then when we're hit by a real drought, we no longer have that flexibility. We no longer have that tool to manage the shortage. But ultimately, this comes right back down to the same thing, and that is we don't store enough water, and again, for a relatively small amount of money, we could literally double the storage capacity in the Sacramento system.
Ironically, though, and I'm sure you would know this, in Southern California, there's actually a good amount of storage. And Southern California is not suffering so much. I mean, you look at their storage facilities, and they're basically full. Northern California,
but they're full because they released 800,000 acre-feet of water last fall out of the Northern California Northern California dams. So now Northern California faces a catastrophic water crisis because their water was ripped off using the excuse of environmental regulations. But when those environmental regulations were invoked, somehow that water ended up in Southern California reservoirs.
What can the federal government do?
The federal government can do a lot. It can, for example, begin by completing the Shasta Dam. That's 9 million acre-feet of additional water storage for $6 billion.
Has there been an appropriation?
It can complete the Auburn Dam. As a matter of fact, we just passed the Hastings bill, which sets up a revolving fund for precisely that purpose. And we have pending in the House my bill, which will set up a one-stop permitting process through the Bureau of Reclamation, based, by the way, on a process established for making upgrades in the Hetch Hetchy Dam, carried by none other than Nancy Pelosi. And as I said earlier, taxpayers don't have to be on the hook for this. These projects are typically produced through revenue bonds redeemed by the users of the water and power.
Okay, his name is Tom McClintock. He is a member of the United States Congress representing portions of Northern California. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are coming to you from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Welcome, my name is Brad Pomerance. We are coming to you from Washington, D.C. We are joined by Doug Malfa. He is a member of the U.S. Congress. He spent 8 years in Sacramento. Now he is in Washington, D.C. How's your new job?
Hey, you know, I don't think much of the commute, but there's a lot of great
Right.
things about it here, being in the nation's capital, being involved with decisions that are both national and international in scope. And,
Sure.
And so it's been just a tremendous honor, but the commute's just the
No, I hear you. I hear you.
You know, but I'm happy to be engaged, and certainly people pay a lot of attention to what we do in Congress if you compare that sometimes to the state legislature.
Which is ironic in that California is such a large state. It's a nation state, essentially. So many important decisions come out of Sacramento. But you're right. I mean, member of Congress, it's a very lofty position. I want to speak with you, though.
You mentioned what comes out of Sacramento. I like
Yeah,
to
please.
Remind people when I get a chance, just because you see it happening in California, don't do what we do in California. Okay? We want the rest of the country to still be. Anyway.
Yeah, I've heard of your humor, and I enjoy it very much. I want to talk about whiskey and water. We know that whiskey is for drinking. We know water is for fighting over, as Mark Twain said, not me. And there's
We're going to cover the whiskey first? Or
whatever you want. Let's have some.
Sorry.
We are in the nation's capital. Let's talk about the challenges facing California. You're a farmer yourself. You know how the state is just parched and dry. Tell me how bad it is, not as a congressman, but as a farmer. How bad is it?
Certainly. Now, a lot of people want Congress to do something about these issues, and we would like to help affect change on the water supply situation. Some people believe maybe Congress can make it rain, or
Right.
maybe Congress itself thinks that.
Let's do a rain dance.
But
Right.
it's really not up to us to try and change nature, but certainly we should be doing more to take advantage of what nature does for us. And so it comes down to water storage.
Right.
If we're making more and more places to store water, doing the projects that we should have been doing 40 years ago, it wouldn't be nearly as bad because we've had more stored water over time.
I want to talk about storage because there is no doubt that has become the buzzword of this crisis. We need more storage. And you were in the legislature when the state legislature had passed a bond. It was an $11 billion bond.
Just to place one on the ballot, yes, sir. And
Yes.
That's been delayed 2 or 3 times since then.
That's exactly right. And so it has not been on the ballot yet. Right now,
We're doing silly things like high-speed rail and other spending
that's a
instead.
whole, well, we'll get there, I
Yes.
promise. But right now, there is an effort to revamp the bond. Both Democrats and Republicans are looking at storage, but there's no doubt the Republicans are more focused on more funding for storage. I know you're in Washington now, but that being said, why is it your view and many Republicans' view that it is storage that is the issue of the day?
Well, it's been sold to the voters many times over, say, the last 20 years. All these different bonds are called water bonds. It'll say the Safe, Clean, Reliable Drinking Water Act of 1994, 96, or 98, or
Right.
2002. Yet the water storage never happens in there. It's always other things. And some of it's good infrastructure. I mean, it's good that they're doing more water recycling, they're doing more conservation practices. Those are all good things. The urban areas are doing a good job at that. But we need to have people create more supply to begin with because the population keeps increasing of the state. And the environmental take of shifting water from traditional uses to just pushing more out the delta, out through under the Golden Gate. Every time a court decision comes along, more water is appropriated away from people that are using it towards what I think are dubious non-science outcomes for fish habitat, as
Right.
they
I mean,
say.
there's no question that there is this dichotomy now. Are we preferring fish over families? And I want to talk more about that when we
can
come
do
back.
both, though.
And I want to talk more about that when we come back. For our viewers on HLN, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We've been joined by Doug Malfa, member of the U.S. Congress. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, sir, let's talk about how your view is we can do both, because there is no doubt that for better or for worse, we are starting to see this debate, fish versus family. And you're saying it doesn't need to be that way. Explain.
It's simple, and it's almost, you get tired of hearing myself say it, but if we're storing more water, you have more for everybody else. You know, whether it means urban need, agricultural need, rural cities, rural towns, and environmental uses. So, I mean, we allow tens of millions of gallons of, or acre feet of
Right,
water to
literally.
escape that we could be trapping and releasing when we need. I mean, it's really kind of disingenuous that folks complain there's not enough water on the Sacramento River or the other rivers for fish. If we weren't storing the water behind Shasta Dam, we wouldn't have the option to release water for the fish that we are actually doing right now because of that storage project. If it had never been built on truly dry years, 2 or 3 years in a row like what we have, then you couldn't store any water and you wouldn't be releasing any. Therefore, it would be a narrow puddle like people talk about in the past.
In terms of storage, though, I think, like we suggested, there is at some level bipartisan agreement we need storage. We don't know how much in terms of that bipartisan agreement.
I'll be curious to see what that bipartisan agreement really looks like in Sacramento when they're done with this bond.
But that being said, and you would know this better than I, what do we do today, though? Because storage will help us in the future, but it takes time to build storage. So what do we do today?
Right now, it is, again, conservation of what you have, using it wisely. And what's really unfortunate is that we've had a series of storms in central and northern California that produced...
Even southern.
Yeah, yeah, there are mudslides. You know,
right, that's another conversation.
So it shows that we're not quite ready to make available the water that does happen because, for example, under the 92 Bay Delta Accord, water could have been pumped from the Delta during the storm, where more water than was necessary or required under the 92 Accord was allowed to go out into the Pacific. 100,000 acre feet got away from us that was above the action level of what was required to be in the bay, or in the Delta, and could have gone into, been picked up by the pumps and stored somewhere in another facility. 100,000 acre feet lost during these storms.
You talk about conservation, and obviously that's what we can do today. I'm wondering, though, right now, all we see out of the state is requests for voluntary conservation. Governor Brown says, please try to cut your water by 20%.
Well, it's an election year for the governor and everybody.
But that's my question, though. I mean, do we need to take more drastic measures? Some communities are engaging in mandatory conservation. I mean, many in North State are really struggling. How much do we really want?
I believe that's going to come online. What really makes us nervous in rural California are people that have long-standing water rights and water usage is that we're hearing some of the agencies are going to usurp those water rights and just seize beyond what is already allowed by law when you can, in drought years, take down to 25% or 50%. Right. They want to go beyond that, and I think upset a lot of very important water law. They need to come to the districts, come to the water users and say, here's what we need, how can you help us, what can you market, or what can you do to help transfer water from here to there where it's really needed, but do it on a basis where it's collaborative instead of government just coming and taking.
I want to discuss high-speed rail, as you asked. There is no doubt high-speed rail has become a lightning rod in the state. Governor Brown is committed to high-speed rail, yet we see the voters are getting a little wary about it, even though they passed it in 2008. Some of your friends, Mr. Denham, a Republican from the Central Valley, is working to see high-speed rail get derailed, if I may say. Where are we today with high-speed rail?
Well, I helped lead the charge in 2010 when I was in the state Senate to stop the funding of high-speed rail until they had a plan. Well, finally they came out with a plan that showed us the price had tripled from $33 billion to build the rail that the voters were told on the 2008 ballot, when finally in November of 2011 they came out and said, oh, this is going to be $99 billion. Triple the price.
Allegedly,
well, because
68 or
they
something.
now have 68 because they're using the local rail system in San Francisco to San Jose and in northern LA into central LA. So they're trying to cut the costs, but it won't be truly high-speed rail, which doesn't meet the mandate of Prop 1A the voters passed. So it's going to be illegal in that sense when it finally is vetted out. You're not going to have a high-speed train that goes all the way.
And the courts have weighed in and have really validated your position. It's not truly high-speed rail. There isn't enough funding as required.
It's just simple math. They only have $13 billion of identified money, $3 billion from the federal stimulus package, which wasn't even anticipated in 2008. It's something because of the President Obama's election that they threw in on top, and we only have just under $10 billion of state bonds that could be spent. So there's only $13 billion out of the $68 billion downsized one.
In our final moments then, what do we do though? What do we do?
We need to put it back in front of the voters to say, why don't we use the money that is set aside? I'm going to ask the president with a letter we're going to have to him, say, Mr. President, you've been to the valley, you've seen the drought, let's shift the money away from high-speed rail and the stimulus money that only you seem to control and put it towards helping California's drought by building supply.
His name's Doug Malfa. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.
How long was the lengthiest drought in recorded world history? 5 years, 12 years, 33 years, or 400 years? The world's longest drought lasted 400 years, from 1571 until 1971, in the Atacama Desert of Chile, the driest place on Earth.
Welcome, I'm Brad Pomerance. We are coming to you from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. We are joined by Devin Nunes. He is a member of the United States Congress representing the beautiful portions of the Central Valley, Central area, although it's been very tough, very tricky times right now. I know your family is in farming. Talk to me about what it's like on the ground for you, your family, your constituents during this water crisis, this drought.
Well, Brad, we're used to the water crisis because we've been living it basically for my entire adult life. And it's really one of the reasons I first ran for Congress, because I could see as a farmer and somebody who was actually drilling wells and continuing to rely more and more on groundwater, that bank account was going to run out someday. And because the state has not been using the infrastructure that was built starting at the beginning of the last century, they've essentially shut that infrastructure off, and now we're out of water.
And I want to talk about groundwater because I've spoken with some of the members of the California State Legislature, Connie Conway, Anthony Cannella, and they have talked about how there are areas where the groundwater basins have literally created what's called subsidence.
That's right.
Where they've just kind of collapsed on each other, and you can't recharge them. If there's subsidence,
and it does permanent environmental damage. So a lot of the water that's been, actually all of the water that we have not been using and being flushed out to the ocean, that's water that is supposedly going to protect the environment. Yet there are no measurable benefits that all the water we've flushed out over the last 20 years because of environmental regulations to protect the delta smelt, okay, which is essentially a bait fish. All of that water has had no impact on the population of the smelt or the population of the salmon. But what's happening is there's permanent environmental damage being done in our part, which is a small part of the state, but a very important one. It's really the breadbasket of the world. It grows
the salad bowl.
It grows over 300 different crops. Growing up, I mean, my family, we've grown almost everything over the years.
But you know, the delta smelt has become kind of a lightning rod for so many and so much of this debate. But the question becomes, what can be done on that issue? I mean, the courts have been very clear that they're protecting the delta smelt. I mean, what does California do?
So Congress wrote the law. Congress needs to change the law. So if the delta smelt is supposedly a threatened species, I actually even have a disagreement with that. But the populations of the smelt go up and down. Populations of the salmon go up and down. What we are doing, what the court is doing to the people in my district, trying to protect this fish, is not helpful. It's not helping the fish, and it's doing permanent damage to our communities. We have farm workers out of work. We have the highest unemployment in the state. We're doing permanent, long-term environmental damage. I can go on and on of the fairness and really the stupidity of all of this. So in the House of Representatives, to answer your questions, we actually have changed the law. Not only this Congress, but last Congress we passed a bill to change the law. And unfortunately, the Senate, the U.S. Senate, has done nothing.
But your friends on the Democratic side would say that while there may be need for some reform of environmental regulations, that the laws that are being proposed, they're trampling on states' rights, which is an issue that, you know, purportedly is more of a Republican concern than Democratic concern. And so we're kind of in this, you know, this pissing contest.
Well, because obviously there's one side that is telling the truth and one side is lying. So I'll leave that up to the viewers and the people at home to decide. But anybody that comes in here and argues about states' rights either doesn't know what they're talking about or they're a useful idiot to the cause. Because the issue with states' rights has to do, every single federal law, the entire Central Valley project, every dam in California, that's all federal government that has imposed itself on the state going back for a century.
When we come back, I want to talk about dams. I want to talk about storage. Sure. So much more to talk about with Devin Nunes. He's a member of the United States Congress. For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, sir, let's talk about dams and storage, because that obviously is a very significant issue that's being percolating, if I may, throughout the state. As you know, I know you're in the federal Congress, but there is a bond that will likely be on the ballot come November, and there are competing bonds.
Yeah.
The Democratic bonds have maybe $1.5 billion for storage. Republican bonds about $3 billion for storage. Where are we on the question of storage?
Well, for the most part, it's a lot of lip service, because the money is not so as important as being able to actually construct the projects. The projects could be paid for by the water users. This is not the old days where we need these projects for flood control. This is all about people who need the water, need to use the water. So whether it's $1.5 billion or $3 billion, it's really irrelevant as to, are we going to do things like they do for football stadiums and basketball arenas, where conveniently they go in and waive CEQA, waive the environmental rules. Because even if we could get to a point where we could actually begin construction, we'll never get a dam built for 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, we'll be long out of water in my area before that ever happens. So this is really about politicians paying lip service to the bond, and really the bond money is irrelevant at this point without actually clarifying and fixing some of the environmental regulations.
So what do we do today?
So
right now, even, storage will come or it won't come. We have a problem today.
Well, real simple. On the federal side, the House has passed a bill. The Senate has done absolutely nothing. So the House bill fixes most of the problems. We'd like for the Senate to pass a bill so we can come together so that we can allow the current infrastructure to work, the pumps to run, and other onerous regulations to come off the books, so that we really focus about delivering water to people and to protecting the environment.
If the bill did pass, let's say, and was signed by the president, would it help the problem today?
Absolutely it would. We have today, as we speak, water that is not being captured that 7 years ago would have been captured. And in the meantime, we have cities that are running out of water. On the state side, we should treat these water projects, since water is the most basic part of life. We need water. It's water and food, but water first.
Sure.
If the state legislature is willing to waive the environmental rules to build football stadiums and basketball arenas, they darn sure should be willing to do it for a few water projects across the state. 3 water projects would be very, very helpful. One, right above Fresno, Temperance Flat, Upper San Joaquin River. The second one would be Sites Reservoir, and the third would be Raising Shasta. Those 3 projects, combined with making the federal law so that the pumps and all the infrastructure can work as they were engineered to work, we would have not only not have a water problem, we would have a water surplus.
How quickly could that happen?
The Senate could pass our bill today if Senator Feinstein or Senator Boxer would take the bill up and try to pass it.
But do you need that federal law, or can you go to the state and have them start to build up the Shasta Dam as you described?
No. That, as it relates to the legislation that we have pending in the federal, that's how the federal and state works in conjunction. The federal laws are really what are hammering and stopping the current infrastructure from operating. So that has to pass.
What's your sense of Governor Brown's Bay Delta Conservation Plan?
I think it's all lip service. I don't think there's not much to it.
Because why? Be specific if you can. For our viewers, $23 billion project, creating tunnels to try to resolve some of the issues.
Yeah, so there was the easiest and simplest, probably most useful project would be to build a canal around the Delta.
Right.
Okay, the environmental group sued on that. They'll never let it go. They'll never go forward. So what they did is they converted, well, let's do tunnels.
Right.
Well, why did they do tunnels? Because one reason, the environmental groups have not figured out a way to regulate the underground yet. So it was a way they could get from around the environmental rules. But the truth is that the price tag has continued to soar on this. They're really not necessary if we passed a federal law here that and allows us to use our current infrastructure, and then do like we do for football and basketball arenas, and make sure that the 3 dam projects that I D-A-M,
got it,
can be built.
So
we did that, and that would be state legislature.
So where do we stand today? I mean, look, you have Democratic colleagues in California that are recalcitrant on this issue. What do you do?
Yeah, well, I think what you're seeing is the policies that they've passed for the last 40 years that have really been implemented over the last 20. Okay, so it started in 1973 with the Endangered Species Act. 1992 was the first big water takeaway that passed out of the Congress. What they've done now that they don't want to own up to is that they've ran the state out of water.
Okay. Will you come back?
Sure.
His name is Devin Nunes, member of the U.S. Congress. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are coming to you from Washington, D.C.